Welcome back, everybody, to Ein Sof Learning. Thank you so much for joining me back for another weekly dose of light. And I know that this Parasha, we accidentally made it of Kedoshim last week. That was a mistake. This week is really the Parasha of Kedoshim, where we're going to talk about what it means to be holy and how to become holy. It's a continuation of last week's episode, where we spoke before that really the entire week surrounds Shabbat. The 6 days of the week, we're building a vessel to be able to receive the Kedusha, the holiness of Shabbat. Shabbat is a window in time where we are given the opportunity to access a very high divine light, what we call Kedusha, holiness. But you can only receive that light if you have a vessel. And that vessel is what we're building during the 6 days through our divine service, whether it be through doing Gamilut Chasadim, which means good deeds, Avodat Hashem, which means praying properly, or Limud Torah, studying the Torah with the proper kavanah, which means Leshem Yichud Kudsha Brichu Ushchinte, in order to unite the heavens and the earth. That is the intention that we need to have going into our divine service during the weekdays. And according to the amount that we perform during the 6 days, that is how much we're going to be able to eat on Shabbat. Because if you don't prepare, you don't have anything to eat on Shabbat. And that's the same thing that is paralleled in the laws of Shabbat, that you cannot cook or prepare anything on the day of Shabbat. Friday evening is your last chance to get in the cooking or whatever else that you need to prepare, clean your house, dry clean your clothes, whatever you need to do. It's on Friday or even Thursday night, some say. If you won't have enough time on Friday, before Friday evening, you should do it on Thursday. But the point is that once Shabbat comes, everybody has to put up their hands, stop cooking, stop cleaning, and begin downloading the extra soul which we are receiving according to the amount of work that we've performed during the 6 days. This is the secret of Shabbat that most people, even religious Jews, don't understand. That's what Shabbat is really for. It's to be able to receive extra soul. And this extra soul is the light which we receive according to the size of the vessel that we've built that particular week. Because every week we're building another part of the vessel. So we receive the light as is fitting according to the size of the vessel that we've created that week. Now, exactly what is the kavanah that we're supposed to have? What is the intention during the 6 days? I understand that we need to do avodat Hashem. We need to do divine service, gamilut chasadim, limud Torah, with the kavanah. That I understand. But what really is the meditation or the focus that we should direct our mind toward on each of the days of the week? Because we know that the 6 days of the week correspond to the 6 sefirot of Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, which are the collection of sefirot that we call Zeir Anpin. Zeir Anpin is a collection of 6 sefirot that work together to make up the 6 work days of the week. While Malchut, which is the 7th of the lower 7 sefirot, which is also the lowest of all of 10 sefirot, is Shabbat. That's whenever we receive the upper lights according to the work that we did during the week. So it depends on the 6 days. It depends on Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. And that is whenever you build your Malchut. That's how you build your Malchut. It's through those upper 6. And that's why we see that the only way that the light can really get to Malchut, if you look at the Tree of Life structure, is through Yesod, which represents Friday, or really Yom Shishi, which is from Thursday evening to Friday evening. Because in Judaism, a day goes from evening to evening, not from morning to night, like in the secular Gregorian calendar. Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Boker, Yom Echad. It was evening and then it was morning. That's one day. So it starts from evening, really. Anyhow, Friday is the final day, or Yom Shishi, I should say, the 6th day of the week, is the final day that marks the collection of all of the work that we did during all 6 days, preparing it to be given over to Shabbat. That's why in Farsi, as I am a Jewish Persian, we speak Farsi. The day of Friday is called Jomeh. Jomeh means to gather, to get together all of the work, to culminate all of the avodat Hashem, the divine service that you've done that particular week, because that's your last chance to do the final teshuvah, the final work, the final building of the vessel before Shabbat comes in. It's interesting in Farsi, the weekdays are all counting up toward Shabbat. We say Yek Shambe, Do Shambe, Se Shambe. We're counting 1, 2, 3, and then eventually we hit Shabbat, which is Shambe. Everything is building up to Shambe, which is very strange because Iran is a predominantly Muslim country. But it might be that there is some Jewish influence when you go back into the days, because Jewish Persians have been in Iran for quite a number of years. So they could have possibly influenced the language or the culture there. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not a historian. But that's how it is in Hebrew. Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi, Yom Revi'i, Yom Chamishi, Yom Shishi, and Shabbat. That's why during the 6 days of the week, it's a commandment upon all of Israel to zachor et HaShabbat, to remember the Shabbat. How? Every single time that we pray Shacharit, there's a section called Hayom Yom. It's the prayer of the particular day of the week. Meaning there's a specific prayer we say on Sunday, for Sunday. Then there's a specific prayer that we say for Monday, and then Tuesday, and so on and so forth. But during that prayer, before we recite that prayer, we recite one line where we are remembering that this is Yom Echad B'Shabbat, meaning the first day leading up to Shabbat, because it is a mitzvah. It's a commandment upon all of Israel to remember Shabbat even during the 6 days. In fact, that's the only time that it is relevant to remember Shabbat, because when it's Shabbat, you don't need to remember that it's Shabbat. You're in Shabbat. You have to remember it whenever it's not Shabbat, meaning during the 6 days. The commandment to remember Shabbat is during the 6 days. But the commandment to keep Shabbat, or observe, or safeguard, what we call shomer Shabbat, that is on Shabbat itself. So those are the two aspects of the commandment to keep Shabbat. You have to protect Shabbat, which means to actually follow the laws of Shabbat, which can only be done on Shabbat. And then you have to remember Shabbat. And that's during the 6 days. With everything that you do during your week, it's for the sake of building that vessel that you will be utilizing on Shabbat to receive the Kedusha. Now, why do we want this Kedusha? What are we receiving? I get it. We're building the vessel to get the Kedusha. But what's the Kedusha for? Just for me to be holier? What's the end goal? The idea is that with this holiness, with this light that you are drawing down on the day of Shabbat, you then have to, this is the struggle, and this is really where the divine service becomes more serious. The struggle is to maintain that holiness even during the 6 days. Meaning, are you capable of taking that holiness, that sanctified environment or mindset or divine service that you had on Shabbat with you into the weekdays? Because that is what you're receiving this Kedusha for. It's to sanctify the mundane. Shabbat is holy already. We have to sanctify the mundane. It's the 6 days of the week that we are really striving to sanctify here. But we can only do that through keeping Shabbat, getting the Kedusha from the day of Shabbat, but to allocate it toward the construction of an even greater vessel the following 6 days, that we may be able to receive an even greater amount of Kedusha the following Shabbat. And we take that light and we reallocate it once more toward the construction of an even greater vessel the following 6 days, for the sake of receiving even more Kedusha, a greater amount of light the following Shabbat. And this cycle continues week after week. In other words, life is about growth, right? The tree of life is not the correct translation of the word in Hebrew. Eitz Chaim is really the living tree, not the tree of life. It's the living tree. What's the difference between being alive and living? Those are two completely different things. I'm alive, you're alive. That's one thing. But living means that you're really putting all of your effort and your willpower in the direction of growth, constant growth. And I've heard people say multiple times that the only thing constant is change. The only thing constant is change. That's true, but that doesn't mean that it's a positive growth or a positive change that's taking place. Because a person can not do anything all day long, play video games, eat a bunch of junk food, never work on themselves on an emotional level, self-development level, character level. They're just, they don't really care about self-development. They're here just to receive. They're not here to give. They're a, what's the word? They're a consumer, not a producer. That's the two ways that you can be. You can either look at your life as you're a consumer, in which case that you're here to receive, or as a producer, that you're here to actually be a cause, not an effect. And that's what it means to have the desire to share. We said in Kabbalah, the goal of us being here in this world in the first place is to transform our desire to receive into a desire to share. But the word for sharing in Hebrew is lahashpia. The hashpia comes from the root word hashpa'ah, shefa, which means to be an influence, to be a conduit for the light to flow through you, and therefore you become a cause for another person to become lit, meaning for their candle to become lit. That's really what it means to be a giver, to be a producer. It doesn't mean that you don't receive ever. You're receiving, but only for the sake of giving, which is not receiving at all. It's only giving. So that's the whole purpose of Shabbat. We're not receiving this Kedusha as an end goal. The end goal is not to be a receiver. The struggle is to actually utilize that Kedusha, that holiness, that light, to be a cause for somebody else's candle to become enlightened. The end goal is not for us to become spiritual, but for the globe to reach that global awakening of enlightenment, what we call the Messianic era, which is not only a physical reality where people will be in peace and in harmony, but it is an internal, meaning it's a spiritual reality where each one of us will have peace within ourselves. Because the correction of the world actually depends on the individuals that make up that world having corrected themselves. And if we don't correct ourselves on an individual level, we will never, and I repeat this 10 times a day to people all day long, we will never be able to bring the Messianic era if we are not capable of first focusing on our own spiritual house to make sure that it is in order. Make your bed, as Jordan Peterson famously says, before you go out and try to fix the world. Now, of course, you have to have a balance there. You can't just be only about thinking about yourself, because that can be a catch-22. I keep working on myself to be spiritual, to be spiritual, to be spiritual, but really it morphs into a sort of a narcissistic, self-conscious type of reality, which is completely full of ego. A person who says, I'm working on my ego, I'm working on my ego. In a way, that's ego. Be a conduit. That is really what we need to do. Receive, but for the sake of sharing. You have something that you want to do. You have something you want to work on. But you also got to let it go. You got to learn to let it go and let Hashem take over. That's how you break out of this chain of trying to become spiritual, but then it leads to you having actually a greater ego. We all have an ego, and we all have selfish needs. That is something that is well understood. But the goal is to be able to utilize that power, because selfishness is a potent desire. It is a ratzon lekabel al minat la'atzmi. It's a desire to receive for the self alone, which is evil, which is wicked. What we call in Hebrew ra. Ra is an acronym really for two words, ratzon atzmi, which means the desire of the self. Not a desire to share. It's just a desire to receive your own pleasures for the sake of keeping yourself satisfied, your body satisfied, short-term momentary pleasures. That's really what selfishness is. So we have to be careful that the only reason that we're receiving what we receive, given that it's a holy thing to receive, for example, the Kedusha of Shabbat, is for the sake of now giving it over to the next person in line, to be a cause for somebody else to become enlightened. If it's just about yourself for the sake of receiving, it's a catch-22. Even though you think you're becoming spiritual, even if you're learning Torah, it can still be selfish. Even if you're doing mitzvot. Because to what end are you really learning this for? For the self or for the sake of another? And that's the one difference that sets tzaddikim apart from the rest of the crowd. The righteous are never looking to satisfy themselves only because they want to give to somebody else. Meaning, if they eat food, which they have to eat food in order to stay alive, and so they can bless God, because you got to say a bracha, a before blessing and an after blessing, right? Tzaddikim eat food so they can bless God. But the rest of the crowd, they're always looking to say the blessing only so they can eat. Meaning the end goal for most people is to satisfy themselves, not to bless God. The blessing is actually a burden for many people. If we say it. Most people don't even say the blessing. So we have to transcend that constricted and restricted mindset that really take a step back from yourself. Why are you eating this food? Stay alive? Why do you want to stay alive? Who told you to stay alive? Hashem. Why does he want you to be alive? To transform your desire to receive for the self into a desire to share, which means receiving for the sake of sharing. So the only reason I'm going to eat this food is because I need to stay alive so I can continue serving God and doing my mission. That's the only reason to eat food from a spiritual point of view. Other than that, what are you going to eat the food for? To stay alive for what? To satisfy the self? Like we said, that's ra. That's evil. Now, you can either take this in two directions. You can say, wow, that's too extreme. Never satisfy yourself for the sake of the self. That's way too extreme for myself. Now, Machshava Lavan, which is written by Rabbi Yaakov Abuchatzera, came last week to teach us that is exactly what the Yetzer Hara's job is. To make you think that it is not something that you can attain. Holiness is not for me. It's unattainable. Who am I to believe that I can become holy? And that's what this parasha comes to teach us. The first verse of the parasha, or the second really, reads, "You shall be holy, for I, Hashem your God, am holy." In other words, the commandment for Bnei Israel to be holy is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is holy. We already explained last week that the soul of a person, not only the neshama, but also the two levels that are below the level of the neshama, called ruach and nefesh. So in ascending order, we got the nefesh, the ruach, and the neshama. Those are the three levels of the soul. They're all holy. They are kedoshim. So when it says, you shall be holy, what exactly is God commanding us? If we have a soul, we are holy. If we don't have the soul, we're not holy. So what is this mitzvah? Why is it a mitzvah, a commandment to be holy? If I already have a holy soul, why do you need to command me? I already am. Now, that's what the parasha comes to teach. You shall be holy means, yes, the nefesh, the ruach, and the neshama is holy because it comes from Hashem. They are literally a part of Hashem. Chelek Eloha Mimal, what we explained last week. They're a portion of Hashem. So, what is the avodah that we need to do? What's the chidush in this commandment? So this is where people get a little bit surprised. The body of a person is unable to contain the nefesh, the ruach, and the neshama if it is impure. If the body is contaminated by any measure, the soul has to depart from that person. In other words, whenever you're in a state of impurity, you've actually lost the grip in that current moment, in that specific moment that you're contaminated. You've lost touch with the light. The light departs. The Shekhinah, which is a divine presence, which is really the soul in the Jew, departs from the vessel of the person when they're contaminated. So we need to do teshuvah in order for that soul to return. So what this commandment is really saying is that we need to purify our body. Meaning, thought, speech, and action. Because those are the three levels of our vessel that can contain this light. The vessel is made of three levels: Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael. If you take the first letter from Kohen, you get Chaf. First letter from Levi, you get Lamed. First letter from Yisrael, you get Yud. Put them together, you get Kli. Kli means vessel. Those are the three levels of the vessel, corresponding to the three tiers, which is really corresponding to the mind, heart, and body. So if what we're saying is true, that there is a way to bring the Kedusha of Shabbat into the 6 days of the week, that means that God had made some sort of a mechanism by which we can accomplish this. So therefore, every day, there is an opportunity for a person to receive illumination from the extra nefesh, ruach, and neshama that is available or that was given to them on the previous Shabbat. In specific, it's in the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 8, where it states, "You shall remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." Meaning, every day, you have to remember Shabbat. So the essence of remembering Shabbat, why exactly are we remembering? It's actually to prepare yourself to receive the additional Kedusha of Shabbat on the weekdays. Meaning, not only is this Kedusha that we're explaining available on Shabbat, but it is possible, and actually you have to learn eventually, how to bring that Kedusha during the weekdays, as will be explained further in this video. And through doing this, through remembering Shabbat, that's the secret, is this Zachor et HaShabbat, remembering Shabbat during the 6 days, that therefore you will be careful during the weekdays to toil in mitzvot and to distance yourself from transgressing, from falling into sin, to allow the Kedusha of Shabbat to befall you. Because the sages teach that the Kedusha of Shabbat does not rest upon a person until he purifies himself from all averot, from all his impurity. So although it's true that on Motzei Shabbat, meaning when Shabbat ends, Saturday evening, the additional soul departs from you. That's true. The soul departs. However, it does not leave completely. The illumination from the additional soul that you received that Shabbat actually remains in your body until Tuesday evening, meaning until the end of Yom Shlishi, as we're going to learn. Meaning you've got 3 days, and each day, each of these 3 days, certain part of the additional soul that you received the previous Shabbat remains in the body of a person up until the end of the 3rd day. Then you begin to draw from the upcoming Shabbat, from the extra soul that you're going to receive the upcoming Shabbat. So let's become more specific and explain what is happening on each of the 6 days. Which level of the soul is available on which day. That way we can meditate and intend to receive or connect to that energy on that day. So on Yom Rishon, which starts on Saturday evening and ends on Sunday evening, the illumination of the additional neshama, the 3rd level of the previous Shabbat, remains within a person. On Yom Sheni, which is from Sunday evening until Monday evening, the illumination of the additional ruach, which is the 2nd level of the previous Shabbat, remains within the person up until Monday evening. Then it leaves. However, you still have the nefesh up until Yom Shlishi, which is from Monday evening to Tuesday evening. During that window of time, the extra nefesh of the previous Shabbat retains or remains within your body. Once Tuesday evening comes, the extra nefesh of the previous Shabbat departs, but you begin to draw from the illumination of the additional nefesh of the upcoming Shabbat, starting Tuesday evening, which is Yom Revi'i, up until Wednesday evening. Yom Chamishi, which is from Wednesday evening until Thursday evening, one receives the illumination of the additional ruach of the upcoming Shabbat. And finally, on Yom Shishi, which is from Thursday evening till Friday evening, one receives the illumination of the additional neshama of the upcoming Shabbat. Thus, during the first 3 days of the 6 days, a person should meditate to retain the illumination of the additional nefesh, ruach, and neshama of the previous Shabbat. And during the last 3 days of the 6 days of the week, meaning before the upcoming Shabbat, one should intend to receive the illumination of the additional nefesh, ruach, neshama of the upcoming Shabbat. So that is the system. First 3 days, you're still holding on to the kedusha of the previous Shabbat, while the last 3 days, you're looking forward and drawing from the illumination of the upcoming Shabbat. Therefore, every day you have to meditate on the precious name which is attributed with that level of the soul. Because each of these levels of the soul has a specific name of God that corresponds to that level of the soul. So there's a lot more details that go into this. For example, the special names of God that you have to meditate on in conjunction with the understanding that you're receiving an extra level of the soul on this day, that day. But we're going to do that in the next week's episode because there's a storm about to come and this place is going to be pouring rain in about a couple minutes. So I better get out of here before it does. I appreciate you for coming and joining me for another episode, receiving our weekly dose of light on the Torah portion. Share the video with your loved ones and comment in the comment section your questions or your comments. And I'll see you in next week's video.